In light of the recent news over at Bungie, which is a sort of conclusion to this big saga of layoffs and firings and hirings, it looks like we're probably going to see the end of Destiny and the franchise as we know it, at least over the next couple of years. And it made me do a lot of thinking, because that game and its sequel are two of the most influential games in my life and how I've grown up, and my just gaming experiences as a whole. And I thought I just really want to talk about it, not necessarily the negatives, but more so the positives and elements of the game and the series that, made me love them so much. And it was been over 10 years now since the game came out, if I'm not mistaken. 2014, and I was 12 at the time. And I guess when the game came out, I didn't really click with it. I pre-ordered it, and obviously it had a big load of hype around it being the next successor to Halo from the OG days of Halo 3, Halo Reach 2, 1 and 2, etc. And had a lot of hype around it and a huge budget. I believe it was the most expensive video game ever made at the time. And when it came out, it got a lot of backlash, and I think rightfully so, because it was underbaked. The main story was lackluster and pretty comical, at the best of times. And then obviously a lot of stuff came out post-launch about problematic development, a lot of firing and hiring, and I ended up putting the game down after the first month or so, and I kind of forgot about it, didn't really click with it initially, and I moved on. I was playing a lot of other stuff at the time, Sunset Overdrive, which is another one I'll probably talk about on this channel in the future. But then something happened a few months later, I think, when the second DLC came out, and the game still wasn't in an incredible state, but I don't know, I gave it another crack and I just fell in love with it. I completely clicked with it. The gunplay, the gameplay as a whole, and just everything in between. I think it just provided that sense of community in online gaming, which I guess I didn't really have, because I didn't play a lot of co-op games online per se. I was a much more of a PvP shooter guy. Call of Duty, of course, was the backbone of that, but I just could not stop playing it. I found myself just falling in love with the grind, just sort of chasing this next big thing. And looter shooters have never really been my favorite sort of genre, but Destiny remains one of my favorite games ever made. And I think one of the reasons I loved it so much was that I spoke about the co-op sort of experience it provided, and of course the sort of precipice of that came through the raids, which were these 6-man activities where they would last about an hour or two, potentially far longer, depending how good you and your teammates were at the game. But it was this just unmatched co-op experience that has always been the sort of crown jewel of Destiny and what it's most known for. And building fire teams and grouping up with strangers to team up and work together, it was just a sense of camaraderie you couldn't really get anywhere else. And the third DLC that came out, The Taken King, really was the turning point for the franchise, on the grand scale, because it was the first time it really brought players back, and old and new. And it was, I think, the experience Bungie and the developers, old and new, really wanted to release when the game came out, because it just felt more complete, had an actually compelling story, compelling characters for the first time in the series. And the raid at the end of it was some of the best content I've ever played. Incredible art direction. It just, everything about it was perfect. It really just was the missing piece of the puzzle. And that was some of my favorite times playing a game ever. And that was back in 2015. And then, of course, Rise of Iron, the last DLC of Destiny 1, came out, and that was a sort of nice coup de grace to the end of what would be the first game. Included my favorite raid of the series. Everything about it I loved. It wasn't on the same scale of The Taken King, but it was never going to be, and we knew that going into it. And after that, we sort of had a strange hiatus from the game, and I think as players, we were really used to that, because anyone will tell you from back in those days, because obviously the model changed, but there used to be long waits in between content updates, and you used to be completing the same tasks every week over and over, the same missions to chase these new exotic pieces of loot, and the Gjallarhorn was probably the top of that chain. But we were used to that big wait time. And the Destiny 2 came out, we got a reveal from it in around 2017, and then the game dropped later that year, and it was just felt like we went completely back to square one, if not worse. I don't know if there was a change of direction in terms of the higher ups, what they wanted from the game, but they were obviously trying to appeal to a more casual audience. The whole grind, which is the main appeal of Destiny, is falling in love with that gunplay and these core gameplay systems and doing it over and over. One, because it's satisfying as hell to play, but also because the chase of the grind, as I said, trying to get that next piece of loot, that one gun with the best roll for PvP or PvE. And the initial run in Destiny 2 scrapped all of that. Every gun had a set roll. You know, it worked exactly, they all worked exactly the same as any other copy you would pick up. And everything felt much more stripped back, streamlined, but in the worst way possible. Simplified is probably the better word I would use. And it's such a shame because, you know, Destiny 1 had such a long progression into making it the game it ended up being, which was a great one at the end of it. And it almost felt like we'd just taken so many steps backwards and really hardly any forwards at all. And it was almost like history repeating itself. It was another really rough period for the game. And the first 2 DLCs did little to quell any sort of poor and rough opinions towards the game, myself included. I felt disenfranchised along with thousands and if not millions of other players. And I think a lot of people dropped out of the series, as did I for a time. And that's a sort of repeating theme, I think, for a lot of people who played Destiny is they leave the game for a certain amount of time. It could be months, it could be well over a year, it could be 2, but they always come crawling back, and I'm very much guilty of that. And I actually did when the game released its 3rd expansion. Just as the first game had a big turning point with its 3rd expansion, so too did Destiny 2. And Forsaken was the name, and it dropped and again changed everything, brought the game back to what we knew it could be. It had been and could be, and if anything, I think it surpassed what Destiny 1 did in its initial run. And that's when I picked it up on PC for the first time, and obviously it was a much smoother experience than it was on console. And once again, I just fell in love with that grind so much, and it was a real opportunity to just connect with, you know, my friends in an online basis, which I didn't really do. I'm much more of a single player gamer, and I always really have been, but Destiny 2 has always just been, and the first game has always been, this just major exception. And in a lot of ways I couldn't really just tell you why, but it was just unique in its own way. And I've played other looter shooters like Borderlands and things like that, but they never really clicked with me. The Division and I just never really found that same level of attachment as I did with Destiny. And it was never through a story, which is something I love in games. It was never through a overarching narrative, which even as they got better at doing in the later updates to the game, it was never the focal point on why I loved it so much. And, you know, I like to talk about the emotional side of things and why I love these games. You know, sitting in the orbit screen, which for those of you who haven't played the game is just the idle menu when you're not in a mission or you're not in the social space. Your ship just floats above the planet you were last on, and you can go access your menus, change your gear, etc, etc. But I always used it as a sort of space to, I guess, reflect on whatever I was thinking about, and that could have been out of the game, but you know, it was a nice sort of space for comfort. Even if I didn't really realize it at the time, I look back on those experiences now, and so many hours of my time on that game were just sitting there kind of doing nothing, either waiting for people to jump on, or waiting for groups to join, or just being inside my own head for whatever reason. And there was always a brilliant overarching score from Martin O'Donnell, Michael Salvatore, which, you know, both of these guys are completely influential and instrumental to why the game was so successful, because the music is really some of the best in any game and a lot of pieces of media in general. It's very special, and I highly recommend you check it out. In fact, you're probably listening to it right now, as I usually do, put the corresponding music to whatever game I'm talking about. And again, Destiny 2 continued for a long time, and in the grand scheme of things, it's still going, and far longer than the first game ever did. And it went into different routes. You know, we had much more of an RPG element that Destiny 1 was kind of originally meant to be. A lot of really focus on build crafting, stat blocks, you know, hyper optimization. This is more on the PvE front I'm talking about. And, you know, that was a mixed bag. And again, I spoke earlier about they changed their seasonal model to sort of accompany that. We got content a lot more regularly. It was more on a per few months basis, and it was this constant evolving story every week. I personally never really enjoyed that style because it almost felt like we were spreading the content we were getting too thin and there wasn't too much of substance. But I will say Destiny 2, for all of its flaws, had the highest of highs in terms of games. You know, of course, I'm going to speak about all the different raids because they were so special. And of course, they added an extra element to that with the titles, which are another sort of accolade to chase, which would have a sort of title below your username, showing that you'd achieved something, you know, very special. It was a group of
accolades that you had to accomplish in the game. And one of them in a lot of these titles was to beat a raid as a team without dying. And I did end up doing that with a group of people. And it was a very difficult experience and took many hours, but we got it done. And it was such a fulfilling experience. And yeah, special. Again, provided a sort of, I guess, reaction in me that you just can't really get from any other game. And you know, I took my breaks away from the game because the grind would get too much. I felt overwhelmed with the content, and a lot of Destiny players will probably talk about the FOMO of not playing, fear of missing out of content. But I think as I grew older and experienced, you know, different things with games and different genres, you know, found new favorites. I guess I started playing the game less and less, and so did my friends. I think I watched as a lot of the friends I still am friends with now dropped out of the game and stopped playing it as much as they used to as adulthood crept in, and you know, we have adult responsibilities and other things we've got to do, and that's fine and that's normal. But I always sometimes just pick up and play Destiny, even if it's just for 5-10 minutes, just to sort of, I guess, relive some of those old experiences, but also because it's still, even now, very fun to play, and probably more than it ever was, at least on a PvE front. Because, you know, on PvP, I don't want to speak about that too much. One, because I'm not incredible at it. But two, because it was never really the focal point of Destiny, as much as those avid players will tell you otherwise. You know, it never really got the same level of love in terms of development. You know, barely any maps were added post-launch for D2 for years and years. In fact, I think there were 3 years minimum without even getting a single map. I could actually be more there. I might be wrong. But hopefully that's something we see change. But it just, you know, the reason I wanted to talk about this game, I was struggling to decide which game I wanted to talk about this Friday. And yesterday, the news dropped, as I spoke about at the start of this video, of a mass layoff. So 17% of the current employees at Bungie have been laid off entirely to cut costs. And that is, you know, devastating to hear. The games industry, you know, obviously doing my degree on game design, I know a bit about it. And hearing about all these mass layoffs, the industry's not really in a good space right now. And it sucks because I've heard a lot of other things through reputable sources that, you know, Bungie's plans to work on a Destiny 3 were never even in sort of any concrete ideas. There was no concrete development there. They had some spin-offs planned, that's been cancelled, and development has been drastically reduced on Destiny 2 and their next game, Marathon. And that's just so sad to hear because, you know, as I said, Destiny holds such a special place in my heart, and it really feels like we're coming to the end now, 10 years later. And if this is the end of the series, I think the Final Shape, which was the name of the last DLC, I think that was a perfect way to send it off. And I think that was maybe Bungie's plan all along in many ways. It was this big culmination of everything, narratively, the story and the series had been building towards through building blocks, through the lore, which I didn't even speak about after probably doing another video. You know, the lore, the gameplay, just little nuggets of information we get has all culminated into this grand narrative they've been building. And of course, they released it with a raid, and the latter half of Destiny 2's life cycle has been rife with a lot of negativity and some poor expansions, which I'll be the first to admit. But the Final Shape was really its make or break moment, and at least initially when it came out, it looked like a make moment, right? You know, incredible reviews critically and from the hardcore and casual fans. The raid was an incredible experience to watch. The streamers do it on day one, trying to beat it, staying up for like 24 hours, trying to get it done. And, you know, it was a perfect conclusion to this 10-year saga. But I guess in hindsight, it is a break moment because despite its success, and I'm assuming it had some commercial backbone post-launch, it seems like it's not enough. And these layoffs will come out the other day, and I guess it's sad that these developers have poured their heart and soul into the series and this final expansion in particular, which is probably the biggest piece of content they've ever made, only for it to all be undermined by mass layoffs. And that's a real shame. So, as I said, if this is the way Destiny is going out, it will be a melancholy way to do so. But I'm forever grateful for the last 10 years I've had playing it. And I hope, and I'm crossing my fingers, that we get just at least a few more.